Comic Anthologist. And if you're tuning in for the first time,
Please hit that subscribe button.
and also hit that bell to also get updates and also to let us know that you liked it or not. And one other thing, if you have any questions or comments or anything about the history of what we're talking about, you could always reach us at thecomicanthologist@gmail.com. Now today we are going to talk about a DC character that pretty much has been around since the 70s and the late 70s, and he goes by the name of Firestorm, the Nuclear Man. Now Firestorm, the Nuclear Man, made his first appearance back in March of 1978, number 1, Firestorm, the Nuclear Man. Which was basically...
Wow, that was 40 years ago? Wow, it doesn't even seem like it.
Yeah, when you think, ooh,
Man.
ouch.
Wow.
Okay. Oh man, the character was created by Gary Conway and Al Milgrom. And it was one of those things where they brought something interesting into the mix with this character because it was a combination of Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein.
And at some point later on in the future, when they had different iterations of the character, they had Jason Rusch and Ronnie Raymond together.
And that's the thing, those characters wouldn't show up. I mean, not Ronnie Raymond, but the Jason Rusch character wouldn't show up until 2004. But getting back to the main original version of Firestorm, that issue, or rather I would say that series lasted only 6 issues back in the day.
Right.
And then it was part of the cancellation cavalcade is what they used to call it.
But see, you know what? They did bring Firestorm back, even though the issues were canceled. They did bring Firestorm back up in the Superpowers cartoon series, which was like that was the continuation of the Super Friends.
And also
so that gave him more exposure.
And also, just to interject as well on that one, they also put him in the Flash book, Volume 1, which was issues 280 to 340, and was always these one-off stories, and it was each 8 pages per story, basically leading up to Firestorm getting his own series again in 1982, and that series lasted from 1982 to 1990. And that one, it started off as Firestorm, the Nuclear Man, and then eventually, as the series became and evolved, it became Firestorm.
Well, let me interject now.
Okay.
The character of Firestorm is basically a combination of 2 people. Just like we just said, Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein. Professor Stein has always been a consistent mainstay of the Firestorm, which is called the Firestorm Matrix. But basically, 2 characters would combine to become one, and it usually would be the body of Ronnie Raymond, and then Professor Stein would be the disembodied voice, giving Ronnie Raymond advice on how to handle certain things whenever actions required their superheroics.
And then here's the other thing that was thrown into the mix.
Right.
When the explosion that basically fused the both of them together, Professor Stein was unconscious.
Right.
So Ronnie Raymond was the one that was the main forebearer of the Firestorm duo between the two. And Stein would definitely advise him or whatnot eventually as time went on. But every time they split up, Stein didn't have any issues, or better yet, he didn't have any memory of being part of Ronnie Raymond until later on down the road. And then once that was all established, when the two were able to become the meeting of the minds, instead of Ronnie becoming Firestorm and Professor Storm jumping into it, Professor Stein jumping into it.
It's not the X-Men, man.
I know, it's just, I misspoke. But in any case, getting back to my point about Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein, it was something that was kind of a different thing and a different take back in the 70s and the 80s because you had never seen a character like that before.
Right, but I do want to interject too. Professor Stein hooking up with Rick James.
No, you were... No.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing.
No. Ignore him. All I have to say is that I like the iterations that they've done over the last few years.
My favorite one is Jason Rusch and Professor Stein.
And Jason Rusch made his appearance in 2004, but when he became Firestorm, it was because of an accident or rather a tragedy that happened to Ronnie Raymond. He had ended up getting killed, getting stabbed in the middle of a fight by a sword. I can't remember the villain's name, but he got stabbed in the chest with a sword and his containment suit ruptured. So he had to get out of the area.
So he didn't cause a nuclear explosion on the ground.
And killed everybody that was in the middle of the fight with him. But what was left of Ronnie Raymond in terms of the Firestorm Matrix, happened to catch Jason Rusch as he was out going to run an errand because he was basically doing something he shouldn't have been doing at that time. And in order to survive, the Firestorm Matrix bonded with Jason Rusch. Now, when Jason finally got control of his powers or whatnot, he was able to merge with people at will, and definitely Professor Stein was not part of this matrix. But here was the trick. Here's the ticker about this one. Jason Rusch, anyone he would bond with, he would have to leave them alone eventually and separate themselves from
Because
him.
the people that he bonded with basically were like living batteries.
And the first person he did bond with tried to kill him. It was a drug dealer that he was working with trying to get him to do a job.
Right.
And the job got botched. So the drug dealer in turn stabbed Jason, but Jason in turn merged with the drug dealer and eventually was able to take care of whatever situation that was happening in the area.
Right.
But he ended up using that drug dealer's body up so much so that when they finally separated, the drug dealer literally turned into a pile of mush and just melted away. And that just set up the whole new thing about whoever he hooks up with in terms of becoming Firestorm.
Oh, and there was a different iteration of Firestorm during the New 52, which lasted. The first 12 issues dealt with basically Jason Rusch and Ronnie Raymond both had the Firestorm Matrix.
Oh yeah. But that was because Professor Stein was experimenting with the God particle and formula,
And certain bad guys wanted to take that.
of course,
matrix.
yeah. They basically they found out that Professor Stein had sent it to 4 different people. Now the last person to get it was Jason, because Jason was being mentored by Professor Stein.
Right.
And when that happened, when those same terrorists that tried to get after that canister, and it was very unstable, had it in his locker, he figured it would be safe, very unstable. It happened to, when he opened it, an explosion basically bathed him and Ronnie Raymond was in the same area when that explosion took place. And both of them ended up being sprayed with that God particle formula.
And they both became their own individual Firestorms without having to merge with anyone. But this was the clincher, though. If the two of them got together at that point, they turned into a being called the Fury,
And
which
very-
was
very
and it was like double the powers of Firestorm,
but very, very unstable.
unstable mentally and physical wise and everything. I mean, like a big hulking, almost like a big hulking Firestorm-like creature. And so I thought that was very interesting.
Well, that was a different take that they had to
Yeah,
do to it, because it brought something new to the table when they did that.
Also, too, but then come to find out, up till issue 12, of course, with the New 52 series, there were other Firestorm Matrix from other people in different parts of the world, and they all converged on each other at one point, like with around the issues 11 and 12.
Right.
And then they had an issue 0, which kind of reset everything, and it
And
basically turned it into Ronnie Raymond and Jason Rusch being the one and only Firestorm again. But this time, instead of Professor Stein being the disembodied voice, Jason Rusch was the disembodied voice. And Ronnie Raymond was still the body of Firestorm.
And here's the interesting dynamic of that, is that during the storyline called The Infinite Crisis, or rather The Blackest Night first, Ronnie Raymond was brought back to life. Remember I mentioned that he was killed in battle or whatnot. Well, one of the Black Lanterns brought him back to life, and he ended up merging with Jason Rusch and became this being called, and that was the first appearance of this being called Deathstorm.
Right.
Deathstorm only made his appearance during the Trinity War, at the end of the Trinity War, and Forever Evil storyline, which came a little bit later, where basically you had Professor Stein in Earth 3, where Ultraman and the Crime Syndicate and Power Ring, he basically experimented with the God particle, but he merged with a dead man and became that version of Firestorm, but became Deathstorm.
Well, now there also too. Before we wrap this up, I do like the iterations that they had on TV, because I have to give them kudos for utilizing the special effects, because they had the version of Firestorm, the live action version of Firestorm, appeared on the first season of The Flash.
And it was played by Robbie Amell. Yeah.
Robbie Amell, and it was the Robbie Raymond, Professor Stein combination. But when they first appeared together, it was an unstable combination.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the guys at Star Labs helped them create a containment suit.
Yes.
Which then made them a stable Firestorm. But then the Robbie Amell, the Ronnie Raymond version of Firestorm, perished at like the end of season 1.
Right.
In
When
the
they
beginning
tried
of
to
season
close
2.
the breach. Yes.
Right.
And then you had the other version of Firestorm, which was Jackson Jax, basically. And he was the version that basically replaced Ronnie Raymond as the part of the Firestorm
That was played
Matrix.
by Franz Drummond.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And he stayed on that series until, well, Victor Garber, who basically wanted to go back to doing theater.
Well, then, because remember, the characters carried over from The Flash over to
the Legends of Tomorrow.
Right.
And once the Legends of Tomorrow storyline was done in terms of Victor Garber and Franz was done, that's when now that version of Firestorm is no longer around. But I have to give kudos to DC for creating the TV series, the WCW, creating that TV series where they did 2 different iterations of Firestorm. And they briefly touched upon a version of Deathstorm, but that was played by Robbie Amell, and that was in another alternate world or alternate parallel timeline.
And I also have to give props to the cartoons that came out with not only the superpowers that came out with, but they brought in Firestorm during episodes of Brave and the Bold, Batman Brave and the Bold.
And they also did a version of Firestorm, which was the Jason Rusch version on the Crisis of Two Earths.
Right.
And that's when they were doing a recruitment drive to have new superheroes join the Justice League in that particular cartoon, which I have to say they did it so well it wasn't even funny. But we will review that at another time.
Right.
Well, until then, before I go, what was your best Firestorm story before we go?
The first one, the origin story, and I read that at an old girlfriend's house back in the day. Her little brother had a Firestorm comic book lying around. I forgot which issue it was, but it showed the origin of Firestorm dealing with Professor Stein, Ronnie Raymond. Mm-hmm. But then another villain was a Firestorm villain was created at the same time during that explosion at the power or that place where it happened, and the villain was known as a multiplex, where he could split himself into multiple versions of himself.
Right.
Kind of like Multiple Man or
from the X-Men.
But I thought it was pretty cool. But that was my first Firestorm story. That was what I was first exposed to, and that's like back when we were teenagers.
Okay, my favorite Firestorm story would have to be the one where Professor Stein had literally was on death's door. He was dying from cancer, and Robbie Raymond, basically, Ronald Raymond was trying to save his life. All the while, there was a Russian counterpart there that was trying to help them or whatnot.
Are you talking about Posar?
Yep, yeah. Before he became Posar.
Right.
That was the first appearance of Posar. Well, they dropped a nuke on him to try to take out Ronnie and Professor and also the third person there. But as it turns out, Professor Stein ended up becoming unconscious within the body of that version of Firestorm. And that was 3 people that was combined. It was Posar, Ronnie Raymond, and Professor Stein.
Wow.
That became the ultimate version of Firestorm.
So it was kind of like a living embodiment of nuclear fusion. Instead of fission, it was fusion.
Exactly. And that lasted for a few issues or whatnot, but that was one of my favorite stories, reading that back in the day when we were teenagers.
Right.
Okay, but until then, thank you for tuning in, and if you have any questions, you could reach us at thecomicanthologist.com. No, I'm sorry. thecomicanthologist@gmail.com. Until then, you take it easy and click that subscribe button to let us know and show us your support, and also let us know if you liked it or not. Take it easy. And until the next time.